Milo Yiannopoulos is a right-wing journalist, author, public speaker, entrepreneur, and overall provocateur. He takes very hardline conservative views on cultural issues having to do with race, religion, gender, sexuality. At the same time, he is openly gay and only dates black men. His mother is Jewish and he is from the United Kingdom. He is also very intelligent and was a longtime senior editor at the right-wing news outlet Breitbart. Over the years, he's been writing news, making television and podcast appearances, touring college campuses to give outrageous speeches. He has grown significantly in popularity over the last few years, and many people think that is in part due to the fact that since he is gay, the left cannot easily discredit him as privileged or racist because of his sexual identity and affinity for black men. While most of his views are not wildly outside of the mainstream of conservative thought, he has done and said some very controversial things in his time as a public figure. Billing himself as a free speech fundamentalist, he does not hold back in telling offensive jokes. After writing a scathing review of the new Ghostbusters movie, he took to Twitter and insulted one of the star actresses, Leslie Jones. That was followed by a legion of his Twitter followers going after her, sometimes on the basis of her race. While he is hardly the first person to do something like this, and he did condemn the actions of his compatriots, this ultimately led to his getting banned from Twitter. He has also been banned from various forums due to the outrage that ensues when people find out that he's coming. And during his college tour, which he calls the Dangerous Faggot Tour, many of his talks have been interrupted by protesters, including his final speech at UC Berkeley, where it was ultimately canceled because violent riots ensued that caused thousands of dollars worth of property damage. I, for one, applaud Milo's dedication to free speech and prioritizing debate, facts, and other speech over people's feelings.
If I knew someone around my age that was like, I just had sex with a 13-year-old, I would be creeped out, honestly.
Yeah. What is your age? What is your age?
I'm almost 35.
Okay, well, I'm talking about 28-year-olds.
Oh, well.
Oh, okay. Well, that changes everything.
We get hung up on this kind of, this sort of child abuse stuff.
What the fuck? Alright, so Milo Yiannopoulos, who I brought up on a previous video, has recently come under fire due to allegations that he is a pedophile sympathizer. His popularity has been growing exponentially over the past year, and was at its peak just days ago when it was announced that he would give a keynote speech at the Conservative Political Action Conference, and he also had a $250,000 book deal with Simon & Schuster. This all came crashing down when the Reagan Battalion Facebook page, allegedly funded by a notorious anti-Trump super PAC, pushed a story that claims that Milo is okay with pedophilia. This story and the accompanying video proof echoed through the conservative news media and ultimately led to his invitation to CPAC being rescinded and his book deal being cancelled. Furthermore, he resigned from Breitbart under immense pressure. Let's see the video that caused all the controversy.
This arbitrary and oppressive idea of consent, which totally destroys, the understanding that many of us have of the complexities and subtleties and complicated nature of many relationships. People are messy and complex, and actually, in the homosexual world particularly, some of those relationships between younger boys and older men, the sort of coming-of-age relationships, the relationships in which those older men help those young boys to discover who they are and give them security and safety and provide them with love and a reliable and sort of a rock where they can't speak to their parents. Some of those relationships are some of the most
molestation to me. It sounds
yeah, well,
like
you know what?
It sounds like Catholic priest molestation to me.
And you know what? I'm grateful for Father Michael. I wouldn't give nearly such good head if it wasn't for him.
And yet here you are talking about how, look, some of these kids that get diddled by these priests, I mean, it's a good thing for them. They're getting this love. And now they are also getting
You're misunderstanding what pedophilia means. Pedophilia is not a sexual attraction to somebody 13 years old who is sexually mature. Pedophilia is attraction to children who have not reached puberty. Pedophilia is attraction to people who don't have functioning sex organs yet, who have not gone through puberty, who are too young to be able to understand the way their bodies. That is not what we're talking about.
You are advocating for cross-generational relationships here. Can we be honest about that?
I don't mind admitting that, and I think particularly in the gay world and outside the Catholic Church, if that's where some of you want to go with this, I think in the gay world, some of the most important, enriching, and incredibly, life-affirming, important, shaping relationships, very often between younger boys and older men, can be hugely positive experiences.
That is a troubling video. Milo appears to suggest that not only is it okay, but actually beneficial for a 13-year-old to have a sexual relationship with someone much older. How could that possibly be defensible? Well, in his response statement, Milo says that the video was unfairly edited. He also says this.
The video that came out was edited to include a section where I said that consent was arbitrary and oppressive, but that was from a discussion about affirmative consent on college campuses. That was placed next to a section about 13-year-olds to make it look like I was saying that consent for 13-year-olds was arbitrary and oppressive, and that's not the case.
Okay, well, that's not true. In none of the clips in the initial video put out by the Reagan Battalion was he speaking about affirmative consent rules in college campuses. I don't know if he was referring to another video, or if he is lying, or if he just doesn't remember, because they did talk about that subject in a different part of the podcast, but he was drinking a lot of wine, as you'll see in the video. But either way, that statement was not true. Even so, I went through and watched the full version of all of the videos in question, and there were a lot of edits that may have taken a lot of vital context out. This may have easily caused his statements to be misconstrued. This issue has become wholly confused, so I'm going to go through all of the videos and talk about each clip as we go to try to clear as much up as I can. My initial idea for this video was to play the entire relevant section of the Drunken Peasants podcast, where these videos originated from, and kind of give you my commentary throughout, but it is such a long section that I did edit it for time. I did try to leave all of the context, and there was just a lot of hilarious banter in between a lot of Milo's statements, so I cut a lot of that out. I'm going to link to all the videos, articles, everything below.
So, okay, so you were a kid and you fucked all kinds of older men, correct?
No, not a kid. I'd say I was a sexually aware, promiscuous 13, 14-year-old perfectly able to give consent, unlike the 8-year-old girl that Sarah Nyberg took creep shots of and posted sexually explicit fantasies on the internet of,
okay,
which is what I'm getting in this video so far, but we may continue.
How does everyone feel about the age of 13? Is that, like, everyone's
I think for some
personal?
people it's perfectly fine, but the difference here is that I was giving informed and aware consent, and
okay.
I was a sexually mature young man able to give consent and giving consent to sexual acts versus the exploitation of an 8-year-old girl.
You're saying that you reach sexual maturity at a younger age,
yes,
or at an early age. Okay.
This is when he started to talk about the issue in the Drunken Peasants podcast. Obviously here he is only talking about himself, and the fact that he, an adult now, believes that he was giving informed consent when he was 13 or 14 for sexual relations. You think what you want about this, but in no way is he saying that this behavior should be normalized. He is just talking about the fact that he believes his experience was a positive one.
This is disingenuous in the extreme. This person clearly knows the case well enough to know that there was no supposedly may have looked at child porn. There was in fact an admission of taking pictures and sexually fantasizing about an 8-year-old. Those pictures were then uploaded to the internet, combined with information she doxed her own cousin, combined with information that was more than complete enough for anybody on the internet to find out who that cousin was. And indeed, 10 years later, I did. And even without the internet 10 years ago, you could have done it, and some people say they did. So this is disingenuous in the extreme, because this person clearly knows the facts of the case and is withholding them from viewers.
You'll need some additional context here. What they were doing on this video on the Drunken Peasants podcast is reacting to a YouTube video that was put up by Kevin Logan called Milo Yiannopoulos, Hypocrite and Pedophile Protector. The video alleges that Milo is a hypocrite because he was instrumental in outing a number of pedophiles, particularly Nicholas or Sarah Nyberg, but seems perfectly fine with his priests and others having sex with him when he was underage. Here, Milo is explaining why the two situations are different. Because of this difference, he argues, Sarah Nyberg deserved to be outed, whereas his own boyhood muses do not. So far, he's only referring to two isolated incidents, one of which he was the theoretically victimized one. We could jump to any number of conclusions about this, but it does provide the context we need for the rest of the video. Let's continue the video from here and talk about the greater issues sort of at the end.
If I knew someone around my age that was like, I just had sex with a 13-year-old, I would be creeped out, honestly.
What is your age? What is your age?
I'm almost 35.
Okay, well, I'm talking about 28-year-olds.
Oh, well.
Oh, okay. Well, that changes everything.
Well, you won't
Paul's
hear that
like,
in this
okay,
video,
cool.
I'm sure. I'm guessing, because I've never told this publicly, that you won't hear that in this video, but we're talking about 1325, 1328. These things do happen perfectly consensually.
Here he begins to open up the conversation to boys around 13 years of age and men around 28 years of age, in general having sexual relationships based on his presumably positive experiences.
Often, by the way, it's the women who suffer in these, because what normally happens in schools very often is it's an older woman with a younger boy, and the boy is the predator in that situation. The boy is like, let's see if I can fuck the gym teacher, or let's see if I can fuck the hot maths teacher, and he does. The women fall in love with these nubile young men, these athletic young boys in their prime. And end up having their lives destroyed. They end up having to move schools, move the country, whatever. I would say, in the situation I describe in the Joe Rogan show, I was very definitely the predator on both occasions. As offensive as some people will find that, I don't much care. That was certainly my experience of it. I was very much the predator in those situations.
Here he points out what he sees as a problem with the conventional idea of sexual abuse, saying that sometimes it is the older partner that's the victim in these kind of relationships is not the same as condoning pedophilia. The other people on the podcast joke about this for a while, and then Milo makes his next point.
The point about all this stuff is we get hung up on abuse. This is a controversial point of view I accept, but we get hung up on this this sort of child abuse stuff. And to the point where we're heavily policing even relationships between consenting adults, sort of grad students and professors at universities.
Here he is saying that the issue of child abuse gets so conflated that people see things that are clearly not child abuse, like relationships between professors and their grad students, as child abuse when they're not even children. The conversation for him has moved away from being just about 13-year-olds. This is an important note for reasons you'll see later.
The whole consent thing for me is once again, it's not this black and white thing that people try and paint it. There some 13-year-olds out there capable of giving informed consent to have sex with an adult? Probably. But I was also a 13-year-old. I hung around with 13-year-old guys, when I was 13, and there were some of them that still thought girls were fucking icky at 13. Like, not many, but like they were just coming out of that phase. I don't know that I was ready at 13 to get fucked in the ass by a 28-year-old black drag queen, is what I'm saying. So you can't. The reason these age of consent laws exist is because we have to set some kind of a barometer here. We've got to pick an age and go, okay, look, this is the age where we can reasonably be assured you're an adult, you can give informed consent, you understand the risks and pregnancy risks and all that bullshit.
And I think the law is probably about right. That's probably roughly the right age. I think it's probably about okay. But
Paul of Paul's Ego very eloquently explains the case that I think Milo is ultimately trying to make. Most people don't think a 9-year-old can give informed consent, and most people think a 20-year-old is perfectly able to give informed consent. Where do we draw the line? If it is 16, which it is in most places around the Western world, then why? That question is a paradox. It's not a paradox in the way that most people think of a paradox, such as the statement, "This statement is false." It is a paradox in the sense that it can't logically be possible to answer. Like the question, how many hairs do you need on your head before you're no longer considered bald? There is no way to rightly answer that question. If you believe the optimal age of consent is 16, then what's wrong with giving consent when you're 1 day short of 16? That would probably be okay, but then is it okay if it's 1 day short of that? And this is all without even mentioning the leap year paradox. But on the other side of the coin, what if that 16-year-old has reached the age but still hasn't gone through puberty? Or has some other sort of biological affliction that makes it impossible for them to give consent at that time? The reason that we have age of consent laws is presumably because we need a general guideline. So instead of always trying to determine whether someone is sexually mature enough to consent to sex, we can just point to their age and move them through the court system based on which side of the age of consent that they're on. And Milo says that he understands that and believes that and thinks that the age of consent is about right. But
there are certainly people who are capable of of giving consent at a younger age. I certainly consider myself to be one of them. People who are sexually active younger. I think it particularly happens in the gay world, by the way. And in many cases, actually, those relationships with older men. This is one of the reasons I hate the left. They have this sort of stupid, one size fits all policing of culture. This sort of arbitrary and oppressive idea of consent, which totally destroys, the understanding that many of us have of the complexities and subtleties and complicated nature of many relationships. People are messy and complex, and
this is a big difference in philosophy for a lot of different people. There are many who see a lot of black and white in the world, in the sense that you can create a boilerplate law, a sort of one-size-fits-all rule that a government can just impose that will take care of 100% or at the very least 99% of people. Whereas others see the world where no rule can apply to everyone in every circumstance. And in sort of creating these one-size-fits-all rules, you end up harming people who break that rule, even though it might not, in their particular circumstance, actually be morally criminal. The problem here is, though, that you're talking about sex with very young people, which is an especially touchy subject and important subject for the same reason. This is especially true when it sounds like you're trying to normalize behavior that allows adults to court 13-year-olds. Still, he is very clear in the same breath from earlier that he believes that the age of consent laws are about right. He's just saying that people are complicated, and in his case, he was able to give consent at the age of 13. Is that true? We'll get to it.
Actually, in the homosexual world particularly, some of those relationships between younger boys and older men, the sort of coming-of-age relationships, the relationships in which those older men help those young boys to discover who they are and give them security and safety and provide them with love and a reliable and sort of a rock where they can't speak to their parents. Some of those relationships are some of the most
molestation to me. It sounds
well,
like
you know what?
It sounds like Catholic priest molestation to me.
And you know what? I'm grateful for Father Michael. I wouldn't give nearly such good head if it wasn't for him.
This was the first clip that was in the Reagan Battalion post against him. It has no reference to age whatsoever, but it was not in any context other than older men and younger boys. And then when he's told that what he's saying sounds like priest-child molestation, which it does, he makes a very dark joke about abuse that he allegedly received when he was a child. This is where the edited clip cuts in the Reagan Battalion video. In Milo's statement after this video was released, he made a couple of claims about this particular clip. First, he said that he did not use the word boy to mean child. He says that in the gay community, they regularly use the word boy to mean younger man, usually the submissive partner. He admits this was a very poor choice of words because most of the population views the word boy to mean child. I don't know how true this is, but it doesn't sound like something Milo would make up to get out of this. Secondly, he says that he had in mind when he said this, his first relationship, which was between him when he was 17 and a 29-year-old man. The conversation is very mixed up at this point, whereas everyone else on the podcast was kind of stuck on this age of 13. Milo, as noted earlier, talked about consent issues all over the age spectrum. On the most recent Drunken Peasants podcast, they go over this and say that this is something that Milo was embellishing, that he didn't even need to really say this because they understood where he was coming from, but that he was talking about 13-year-olds. I don't know if he was. It doesn't sound unreasonable to me to assume that he was thinking in his own head, oh yeah, I had that first real relationship of mine when I was 17 and the guy was 29. Very big age difference. I don't think it's unreasonable. He also said this.
What I did do, and I stand by, because it's perfectly true, is say that in many, sorry, I have really bad flu, is say that in many gay relationships, well, for many young gay men, the first relationship they really have, the first long relationship they have is with an older guy who perhaps takes care of them financially, takes care of them emotionally, and very often that can be a release, it can be an escape from an abusive or a uncaring or a difficult household. And if they're having problems at home with their mum and dad, very often kids of 17 will have relationships, for instance, with people of 29 years old, and that's what happened to me.
This is an important point. He's making a point that, especially for previous generations, but even a lot of gay youth now, And I think this is something a lot of straight people don't understand. Young gay men don't always feel safe in their own homes or welcome in their own homes because of anti-gay sentiment of their parents. This often makes young gay men scared or puts them in denial, and that can be very damaging to adolescents. He is merely pointing out that very often younger, consenting adults can explore their sexuality in a safe place with someone who is more welcoming and more experienced and can make them feel more safe and less scared. It's becoming clear to me at this point in the video that Milo did not have a very conventional childhood. Anyway, at the end of the clip, Milo made a very dark joke about how he is very good at fellatio now because of a priest that he had relations with when he was younger. In his statement, he said that jokes like this are how he copes with the abuse. I can totally understand that, but at least during the time of this podcast, and another interview with Joe Rogan, he does not seem to think or at least admit that he was abused as a child. He is in fact saying that he is perfectly able to consent. This interview happened about a year ago. Milo is still fairly young, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that he is still in denial or coping with what happened to him as a child.
And one of the things that you said in one of these clips was that transgenderism is the new, frontier of rights. My wording is bad here, but it's the new frontier of social progress, and the next thing in line is going to be pedophilia. And yet here you are talking about how, look, some of these kids that get diddled by these priests, I mean, it's a good thing for them. They're getting this love. And now they are also getting
You're misunderstanding what pedophilia means. Pedophilia is not a sexual attraction to somebody 13 years old who is sexually mature. Pedophilia is attraction to children who have not reached puberty. Pedophilia is attraction to people who don't have functioning sex organs yet, who have not gone through puberty, who are too young to be able to understand the way their bodies work. That is not what we're talking about.
And Coulter.
Sure, granted.
You don't understand what pedophilia is if you think that I'm defending it, because I'm certainly
No.
not.
I'm not saying you're defending it. I'm saying you're walking the borderline.
No, that's not what you said. You said I was defending it. And you were wrong.
Fine. I retract my statement, Milo. I retract my statement. I shan't slander you further, but you are advocating for cross-generational relationships here. Can we be honest about that?
Yeah, I don't mind admitting that.
This was the next clip in the original video with slightly more context. Paul moves on from the previous discussion and says that he believes Milo is being hypocritical because he's openly against pedophilia, but he seems to be brazenly open to the idea of priests having sex with their altar boys. I think it is pretty clear that Paul and Milo are on two different planes of discussion at this point. When Milo was talking about the beneficial relationship between older men and younger boys, I don't think it was clear that he was talking about priest molestation. When Milo was talking about the beneficial relationship between older men and younger boys, I don't think it's clear that he was talking about priest molestation. Then, after it's brought up, completely separate from the rest of the conversation as a joke, he makes a joke about it. And then Paul said that he appears to be accepting of the practice. Milo then jumps back to the conversation about 13-year-olds sometimes having the sexual maturity to consent to explain the difference between priest molestation and what his position is. This is where a lot of the confusion, I think, comes in for everyone. People point to the video and say, look, he's clearly saying that 13-year-olds blowing priests is a magical, life-changing experience. Milo claims that he was talking about two separate things. Younger gay men having relationships with older gay men so they can help them come to terms with their sexuality, and priest molestation. He goes on to correctly explain what pedophilia is. Pedophilia is a psychiatric disorder in which adults or older adolescents are exclusively or primarily attracted to prepubescent children. Although girls typically begin puberty between the ages of 10 and 11, and boys between the ages of 11 and 12, criteria in the psychiatric journal or whatever extends puberty to be anyone under age 13. So by all accounts, he's not talking about pedophilia. Hebephilia is an attraction to people who are in early adolescence between 11 and 14, and ephebophilia is an attraction for people in late adolescence, generally between 15 and 19. Alright, fine. So he's clearly not talking about pedophilia. He has made it very clear from the very beginning that you can only give consent if you've gone through puberty. It is, however, important to note that he's still maintaining here the claim that a 13-year-old can possibly be sexually mature enough to consent.
I think particularly in the gay world and outside the Catholic Church, if that's where some of you want to go with this, I think in the gay world, some of the most important, enriching, and incredibly, life-affirming, important shaping relationships, very often between younger boys and older men, can be hugely positive experiences for those young boys. They can even save those young boys from desolation, from suicide,
they're consensual.
from drug addiction.
Hold on.
All sorts of things, provided they're consensual. Provided they're consensual.
I'm going to jump to Milo's defense a little bit here, because I've read stories of, like, people losing their virginity, like gay men losing their virginity, and most of the stories do seem to involve, I was 14, I was 15,
sure,
he was 20-something,
yes.
and all this stuff. And, I mean, it does seem more common in that community, so whatever.
I just don't see, just because I was sexually precocious doesn't mean that I'm going to say that every 13-year-old who has sex with a 28-year-old is fine. I don't know, because I don't know the specifics of that case. I'm not saying that every relationship involving those ages is fine. I have said many times that I consider myself an outlier.
I want to play...
This is essentially everything else that was said in the podcast. Milo speaks very brazenly about priest molestation and other types of sexual relationships that make most people uncomfortable. He has since apologized for his lack of tact and very sloppy wording. To recap, though, much of the discussion was about his own experience as a sexually active 13 or 14-year-old, where here and the next clip that I'm going to go over, he says that he can consent to sex. Fine, that was his experience. He talked about the shaky line of consent when it comes to age gap and positions of power. Okay, fine, you can find some disagreements with his positions on those things, but it is not outrageous or an out of the mainstream belief. Finally, he is pretty clear that it is sometimes morally acceptable for someone in their late 20s to have a sexual relationship with someone who is 13, provided they are mature enough to give consent. This is the very sketchy position that he takes that I don't think most people can get behind. The question is it possible for a 13-year-old to give informed consent? I don't know that I've met one. Let's let that be the only issue that we take out of this. Not that he is promoting pedophilia, but that he actually believes that a 13-year-old, under some certain circumstances, can be old enough to give consent as he believes that he was. Here's just a short clip from another interview that people are talking about.
Like I said earlier, if it weren't for Father Michael, I would have given far less good head. I mean,
there was a real Father Michael?
So much less. He's going to get killed now. But
who is Father Michael?
I'm not. No, I bet
there's a real dude. I should maybe suck his dick for real.
Don't make me. I was quite enthusiastic about it. I fucked my English teacher too.
How old was he at the time?
I don't know. He's quite young, quite hot.
Really?
Yeah.
And so that's where it all started? With Father Michael?
No.
Was that post the tranny?
Yeah, it was post. So I wasn't abused
queen?
as a child or anything like that.
I don't know about you, but to me, that shows a very different side of Milo than we're used to. He's usually so loud and unapologetic and has an answer for everything and talks about whatever he wants with this sort of arrogance. But as soon as Joe Rogan points out the hypocrisy that he sees in Milo's position, Milo gets mumbly and quiet and sort of... To me, this is evidence that I think he's coping with abuse. I believe that he did indeed have some sort of sexual dealings with a priest when he was 13 or 14. And he went along with it because he was a kid, and since then he's always maintained that it was his choice and he wanted to do it. To do that, he has to convince himself that he was sexually mature at the age of 13 or 14. That way he can convince himself there's nothing at all wrong with what happened. He wanted to believe that so bad, and in order to maintain that belief, he had to conclude that in some rare circumstances, a 13-year-old can give informed consent to a sexual experience with someone much older than them. And if he doesn't believe that, then he would have to admit that he was sexually abused as a child. He'd have to admit it to other people, and he'd have to admit it to himself. In his statement after this whole incident happened, he finally does say what he refused to admit in these two podcasts, that he was abused and he was coping with it in various very poor ways. But this is just what my research has led me to believe. You can view the unedited podcast or take what you saw in this one and leave a comment on what you think. Beyond all this, to think that Milo is soft on pedophiles, you'd have to ignore his entire body of work. He has exposed and verbally attacked pedophiles on a number of occasions. I'll link below. Let's jump over to the political side of things, shall we? I don't think that anyone believes that this just happened to come out right as Milo was starting to achieve mainstream success and was invited to keynote speech a very highly publicized conservative event. And anyone who doesn't think this was a clearly orchestrated political attack can just get out. On top of all that, this may have only had an impact on him and his political career because he was a right-wing journalist. One, the right wing, including himself, tends to be much harder on pedophilia, and so when he was achieving conservative success, this is one surefire way to get yourself in a lot of trouble. But also, there is an implicit bias against conservatives in popular culture. This is because millennials are largely left-leaning, and they are a growing and loud population. As a result, people like Lena Dunham can get away with talking about sexually abusing her little sister, and George Takei can say this.
How old were you at the time?
I was 13.
And you, what, you blew your counselor?
No, I was very young.
Yes.
And
13 is young,
and
yes.
he was an older teenager. He was a camp counselor.
19, would you say?
He was about 18 or 19, yeah.
Yeah.
And he was experienced.
Yes. And how did he seduce you?
Well, he started touching me and
I mean, wait a minute. Did he came into your cabin?
Yes.
You two were alone?
Yes.
He sits down next to you on the bed?
Yes.
He could tell that you were a gay man? Was it evident at 13?
No, it wasn't.
No.
But
were you sure at that point you were gay?
No, I was not sure.
Right. Were you molested in a sense because you were 13?
No, because I was kind of
willing.
You know, I thought he was pretty attractive.
And what did he do? Did he perform oral sex on you?
It was a hand job.
Hand job.
Oh.
Yeah. Right.
But did he? Any kissing?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And few will bat an eye. But when Milo suggests that it's possible a 13-year-old can be mature enough to make their own decisions, and talks about his past abuse in a fond light, like George Takei did, he will lose a massive amount of income, a book deal, a speaking part, and become a pariah, essentially. By the way, there are a ton of examples of people on the left that have in various ways supported or defended pedophiles and pedophilia. I just picked those two examples because they seem the most relevant, but I'll happily link some more below. That brings up another weird issue. Milo says a lot of offensive shit. He's made fun of transgendered people. Like I said earlier, he ripped on Leslie Jones for her appearance. He said that Leslie Jones looks remarkably like one of his ex-boyfriends, and he still maintains that to this day. And after all this, he was on top of the world a few days ago. But as soon as he's talking about what constitutes sexual abuse and talking about his own experience getting molested, he gets shut down. It's a very strange standard we live in today. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. I hope that I can... Anyway, like I said, all the links are below. Let me know what you think about this particular subject. Was I going too easy on Milo? Probably. Make sure to give it a like, and make sure to subscribe to me whether or not you want to see more of me or not. This is the Hermit, signing out.